Mr. Speaker.
Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and for our province. And in that work, give us strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, seated in your gallery today is truly a truly outstanding Albertan, in the person of Mr. A.C. Anderson, Mayor of Lethbridge. The member for Lethbridge East and myself have had the honor of serving with the mayor since 1975. I would like to very briefly, because the mayor has announced he will not be seeking re-election in this year, outline to the members of the House, Mr. Speaker, and to yourself a comment or two about the mayor's background. Mayor Anderson was elected to the school board in Lethbridge some 36 years ago, and then in 1964 was elected to city council, and then became the mayor of Alberta's largest city after Calgary and Edmonton in 1968, and he served in that office for the past 18 years, being re-elected 4 times, twice by acclamation. Mr. Speaker, he's an honorary colonel. He's a Paul Harris Fellow. He was a Citizen of the Year in 1985, received the Queen's Medal. This past year has received the Order of Canada and was recipient of a Doctor of Laws at the University of Lethbridge. I think, Mr. Speaker, I can truly say Mayor A.C. Anderson is truly an outstanding Albertan, and I would like to have the members of this House join with me, along with yourself, Mr. Speaker, in congratulating the mayor for his accomplishments and wishing him a very happy future. Thank you.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, in the public gallery today are 2 people that are very dear to a number of us on this side of the House, the 16 of us. And they are Marion and Graham Tomlinson. Mr. Speaker, they have served our movement for a long period of time. In fact, they've served it since 1933 when the party was formed. I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my question to the Minister of Public Works. Mr. Speaker, I have information which indicates that a tender call was issued in March at the Walter C. Mackenzie Health Sciences Center for parking control equipment, which was specifically limited to a particular line of equipment which is only made in the United States, even though an equivalent type of Canadian equipment is available and can be supplied locally at a price of $25,000 less than the U.S. product. My question to the Minister, could the Minister indicate why government projects would encourage using a United States firm rather than a Canadian firm which presented a lower bid?
Mr. Speaker,
All I can say at the moment is it's normal within our procurement policies to buy Alberta as much as possible. We have approximately 350 projects underway. The details of this particular tender I am not familiar with, but I will certainly look into it and respond further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd be glad to give the Minister the information on this particular tender. But to follow up on the policy, in answering questions in this general area on Friday, the Economic Development Minister indicated that the policy that, as I understand, as long as all other factors are equal, the province leads toward Alberta suppliers. I think I'm generally quoting the Minister right on that. My question to the Minister, is there any similar procurement policy which states that we should at least use Canadian rather than American products, especially if Canadian ones are cheaper?
I think, Mr. Speaker, it would be safe to say that the general policy is that all other things being equal, we would prefer to buy Albertan. Secondly, all other things being equal, we would prefer to buy Canadian. And I underline all other things being equal.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, flowing from that then. Has the Minister, since taking on his new portfolio, given any specific instructions to his department regarding use of Albertan and Canadian products?
Mr. Speaker, I think if you check the purchasing records of Public Works Supply and Service, the percentage dollar going to Alberta manufacturers and Alberta suppliers over recent years has increased substantially. I have found the more I've investigated the purchasing procedures since becoming the Minister of the Department that the track record is quite good.
I guess that's a matter of opinion, Mr. Speaker. My question was whether he'd issued any instructions regarding this matter. By the non-answer, I'll take no. Can I come specifically back then to this and say, will the Minister undertake that as a matter of policy, that he will direct that this sort of thing should not happen again for Crown and government projects, that we buy Alberta and we buy Canada ahead of American companies, especially while all other things being equal? Will he issue that as a statement?
Mr. Speaker, I think I answered that one earlier, but I don't think the Honourable Leader listened too closely to my last answer. If I look at the growth of purchasing in the last 3 years, we have moved from buying 57.8% of our products from Alberta manufacturers up to 65.8%, a total of $198 million out of approximately $300 spent in these types of purchases. And we're purchasing another 25.6%, or $77 million from Alberta distributors. So I'm not going to start hammering a department that appears to, by my investigations, they'd have a very good track record for buying Alberta where it's possible to buy in Alberta.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
The supplementary and the long same question, Mr. Speaker, but it's to the Minister of Economic Development. I would like to know what he is doing. Could he tell the House what he's doing to help coordinate the Alberta government's buying power as a proactive means of developing Alberta industry in areas of diversification?
Mr. Speaker, we've been very active in terms of encouraging the maximizing of Alberta content in our industrial development permits. And all of the permits require that the developer, those who receive the industrial development permits, maximize Alberta goods and services. Another area we've been working actively in, Mr. Speaker, is with respect to specifying on various projects that the consultants who work very closely with developers, whether it's a Crown agency or otherwise, in undertaking the specifications, that they ensure that the specs are designed in such a way that Alberta companies who are in the business are able to respond to those tenders. Mr. Speaker, in the case of hospitals, the hospital boards are responsible for issuing the tenders, and the bulletin that requires a maximizing of Alberta content has been circulated, Mr. Speaker, to all the hospital boards.
Supplementary member for Calgary, Milliken.
Sorry, a question. I just want to get on the list.
Thank you. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the second question to the Premier. And again, it flows from some of the Premier's intriguing remarks during his estimates last Thursday night. And the Premier said on page 483 of Hansard that the government is looking at the establishment of a huge utility-type refinery near Fort McMurray, which would deal with bitumen from smaller mining operations. My question is to the Premier, because I was not aware of this, and to follow up on this idea, does the Premier have a ballpark figure of the cost of such a facility in current dollars? Are we looking at $2 billion, $3 billion, or could he give us a rough estimate?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have that figure in my head currently, but it would be easy to obtain it and provide it to the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, just flowing from that then, just to take a look at the planning stage, at what stage is the government in the planning stage for this facility, and the funding? Are we, for example, looking at provincial financial support for it?
We're not planning it, nor are we thinking of funding it at this stage, Mr. Speaker. We are investigating the feasibility of it.
Well, supplementary question. In the investigation that we're looking at, Mr. Speaker, I might bring it back to some reality. I noticed today the spot prices for Brent oil are now in the range of $8.75 or below $9, appallingly low. I think we'd all agree. My question then, does the Premier have information that he could share on how any new tar sands ventures are feasible in its investigations without some sort of guaranteed minimum price for the product?
Mr. Speaker, I should point out to the honourable member that there are a variety of prices for crude these days in the international market. The West Texas crude, for instance, is selling above $11. And while there may be the odd sale of Brent crude at a lower price, I think we have to consider all of the various selling prices. But, Mr. Speaker, when you go into a venture like a major oil sands plant, you're not talking about the current price of oil. You're talking about the price of oil in the year 1990, 1991, when these projects would come on stream. And our estimates in those years, Mr. Speaker, we believe that they would be not only very economic, but they would be needed badly by the people of Canada.
Supplementary question to the Premier. Recognizing that we are looking ahead in terms of the price, but my question is, is the government looking at a minimum price when they investigate this project or any other project? Are they looking at the fact that over the life of that project that there would have to be some sort of minimum price?
Mr. Speaker, over the years, and I think, yes, since November the 1st, when I was sworn in as Premier, at least one organization talked to me about the potential for the federal and provincial government sharing the risk of future prices with that company in order that they might proceed with a potential oil sands plant. At the time, though, the discussion didn't go very far. I don't think it is that sharing the risk, which is not necessarily a minimum price but can fit a variety of options, is not something to be discarded easily, and something that would be worth taking a good look at.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Is there federal input anticipated in this dream of the Premier's, or is he going to carry on with his past threats of threatening to do it himself or go it alone?
Mr. Speaker, it hasn't progressed to the point of involving other governments, but it might well be, Mr. Speaker, if the province of Alberta is the only one that feels the need and for Alberta and Canada of this type of project, should it turn out to be something that should be done. We would certainly take a look at it being done with Alberta alone. I think, though, Mr. Speaker, I would believe that knowing the interest of the federal government in this regard, that should the project look feasible, that they would be willing to participate.
Main question, member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, this is also to the Premier, that during this period of economic downturn of $8 or $9 oil and even cheaper wheat, it is critical that the government provide leadership for Albertans by implementing cost-cutting initiatives. Now, will the Premier and his government demonstrate its commitment to cost-cutting by setting up a task force similar to the Nielsen Task Force? I know it's a name very familiar, I'm sure. The Nielsen Task Force, to identify areas where the costs could be cut.
It's an interesting proposal, Mr. Speaker. I'd certainly think about it. I should point out that the Treasury Board, in reviewing budgets, is alert to the matters of cost-cutting at all times, balancing it off, of course, as I said earlier, with the needs to provide the services to the people of Alberta, which they require and ask for, and also with the need to provide a certain amount of economic stimulus during a period when some of our industries are facing tough times. So it's all a balance, Mr. Speaker, but nevertheless, I would not discard out of hand the honourable member's suggestion.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I'll continue to be positive. Is the government in the near future going to be encouraging creative attrition such as re-education or early retirement, job-sharing initiatives, as a means to compassionate cutting of government staff?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member might know that the number of government employees has been reduced now for several years. It's either 3 or 4 years that there has been a constant reduction, and that reduction is accomplished in each case with, I believe, compassionate and thoughtful sensitivity to the people who are being reduced. And I think that's a responsibility of any enlightened employer.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, he's a whiz in math, he's cutting staff, but the cost has been going up every year. Somebody's pocketing some money. Has a cost-benefit study, for example, been conducted, or what indicators are used by the government to measure the return on taxpayers' dollars spent in international offices such as Houston, Los Angeles, New York, London, Hong Kong? Need I go on?
Mr. Speaker, those are matters of judgment, and we're always assessing the investment of dollars in such things as increasing trade, increasing industrial development in this province. We can't just talk about diversifying our economy and then when we make moves that assist in that regard, then start to worry or complain about those expenditures. We will always try and use the best judgment possible, and that our dollars that are being invested are in the best interest of all Albertans.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. But how can the government claim to be fiscally responsible when Albertans hear about first-class travel for cabinet ministers, limousines, clothing allowances, and finally representatives at Expo living in the style of a Middle East caliph?
Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I would suggest, if the honourable member has some specific cases that he feels are, there is some misuse of government funds in some regard, that he draw them to the attention of the government, and we will pursue each one.
Member for Edmonton Norwood.
Supplementary question, if I can maybe specific. One area that keeps going up significantly is travel and hospitality costs. Would the Premier at least consider cutting that this year? At least would send a symbolic message to ordinary Albertans.
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if there are wasteful hospitality and travel costs, definitely they would be considered for cutting. But again, I have to say, when we are facing problems, and we've had members opposite who say diversification is important, support for our industrial development is important, all of these matters are tied together. I think you have to be looking for trade arrangements with other nations. You have to be looking for industrial development opportunities. You have to be attracting investors to this province. All of it's a package. But again, if there are wasteful hospitality and travel matters, then they would certainly be cut.
Member for Vermilion Viking, followed by the member for Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address this question to the Minister of Agriculture. In the recent continuing trade wars that we're seeing between the United States and the European Economic Community, Canada has just recently lost a traditional large sale of barley that it's had with Saudi Arabia. The European market took it at $65 a metric ton. To the Minister, what effect does this loss have on the Alberta producers at the present time?
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the honourable member from Vermilion Viking, I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions in the chamber to indicate our concern as it relates to the ongoing dispute between the European Economic Community and the United States, and our hope that something will be resolved in the very near future. What we can do is continue to make representations to our federal counterparts with the hope, as the honourable minister responsible for the Wheat Board has done in bringing together the major grain producers, with the hope that it will be resolved.
Supplementary. In view of that, then, is there any indication of an end to these senseless trade wars? Has there been any input, and what influence does this government intend to add in helping to stop them at the present time?
Again, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, the minister at the federal level has gathered together the major grain producers of the world to try to reach some consensus as to how best a resolution to this problem can be achieved. I should share with the honourable member also, this government, as was indicated when the Western premiers gathered together, has suggested to the federal government and has pushed in a strenuous way the proposal whereby a deficiency payment would be paid to our grain producers to offset some of the detrimental impact of it.
Supplementary. Again, in view of this stress that's being put on our producers economically, in discussions the minister has had with his federal counterparts, has he had any representation made to him to participate in the federal Farm Debt Review Boards this time?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's some weeks ago that we received a letter from the Federal Minister of Agriculture asking if we would collaborate with him in the establishment of the Farm Debt Review Boards. As I indicated to this House some time ago, we are more than happy to participate in any area that is beneficial to the agricultural sector. I threw back the suggestion to the federal minister that we thought it would be much more helpful in the event that they reduced interest rates from the Farm Credit Corporation to 9%, much like we are doing with the Farm Credit Stability Program.
Member for...
Mr. Speaker, as a supplement to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture's reply, I might say that I've had discussions on this matter of the war between the trade war between the United States and the European Economic Community with the Prime Minister, who has been working very hard. You know, he raised this matter in the meetings in Japan, and he's raised it again, and we've discussed it at several occasions with Prime Minister Thatcher recently, because she will be the incoming chairman of the European Economic Community, and will therefore be in a position to try and influence a turning down of the trade war between the United States and the European community. And we're looking forward to the efforts that the Prime Minister is making in that regard, and we are pleased that he is working in this way.
Supplementary?
Minister of Agriculture, I note the recent report by the federal government that they are pushing for a base price of $10 per bushel for wheat, for domestic wheat. Does the Honourable Minister have a stand on whether he supports that recommendation or not?
Mr. Speaker, quite some time ago when hearings were being held, we submitted a paper to the federal government endorsing that position for the domestic wheat price to be set at $10.
Member for Calgary Mountain View, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask some questions of the Premier on the matter of bilateral free trade and the flow from comments he made in his estimates last Thursday evening. On page 485 of Hansard, the Premier indicated that this legislature would have to agree to this province entering into any agreement. I'd like to ask the Premier whether he was saying that this legislature has a right to opt out of any free trade deal proposed by the federal government.
I don't think using the term opt-out is necessarily the correct one, because we have not yet fully determined what the ratification process might be of any free trade arrangement. But it would be my desire, Mr. Speaker, to bring to the House for debate and for approval any agreement that we would be entering into in the free trade area.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a supplementary, if it's simply a matter of opting in or opting out of an entire agreement, that's one possibility. Would the Premier consider a process whereby we could opt out of certain provisions of such an agreement and accept the rest of the agreement?
Well, as I said, it isn't a matter of opting in and opting out, and since we haven't determined the ratification process yet, the idea of taking just part of an agreement is not one we've considered, and while I just won't discard it lightly, it's, as most members know, when entering into an agreement, you enter into the agreement, not just one part of it, and normally it would not be possible, but I say again, I wouldn't just discard it lightly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a supplementary, I take it that this is our way of protecting provincial rights in Alberta, and I'm wondering if this is a personal policy only of the government of Alberta, or is it also the policy of the other 10 provinces such that all legislatures, provincial legislatures in the country would have the same opportunity to ratify a free trade agreement?
Mr. Speaker, those provinces, provincial governments would have to speak for themselves on that matter.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given the importance of protecting provincial rights through a ratification process, why is it that the premiers lightly gave up their insistence on having an observer's seat at the talks? After all, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member quoted from the Hansard of my estimates remarks the other night, that very matter I referred to and answered in those same remarks. Basically, it was that, and I'll repeat it for him now, although we can check it against the written word. Basically, it was the fact that there are 10 premiers and the Prime Minister who discussed that matter. Some of the provinces felt that with federal initiatives in trade matters, that they didn't want to in any way be part of those negotiations at all. And as a matter of fact, if there was a provincial representative there, they did not want to in any way endorse free trade negotiations even starting. Obviously, I can't get into all of the arguments because that was amongst all the provinces and premiers, because it was a variety of views held on the matter. We in order to allow the federal government to start their negotiations and start them in a way with all of the provinces supporting them, we said that for a trial period, we would work with the proposal of having constant weekly meetings at the officials level, monthly meetings at the ministerial level, and every 3 monthly meetings at the First Minister's level. And for some 3 months, we are going to follow that process and judge whether or not we are receiving the information that we require. It is something that the jury's still out on, and we will be watching it carefully. We do have, as a Alberta Member of Parliament, is also member of the federal cabinet, the senior minister involved in these matters, and we have a very close relationship with him, the Honourable Joe Clark, and may well be that we feel a greater sense of trust in that regard. Nevertheless, we shall watch it carefully.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark. Okay, member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Speaker, to the Premier, as the Premier considered what his statements or view are, his plan on going it alone on upgrader plants and tar sand plants will do to the free trade talks.
Mr. Speaker, the ability of the province of Alberta to determine the development of its resources are not a matter for any free trade talks.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by the member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question's to the Premier. There are clear problems with our federal-provincial relations. We have lost $600 million in the established program funding. We have lost the funding associated with the Husky Oil Upgrader, and we have not lost the PGRT. Why has the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs been downgraded in its priority by combining it with the Attorney General's Department under a single minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, we have not lost the Husky funding. As a matter of fact, we've had additional Husky funding, and the project is proceeding. We have not lost $600 million in transfer grants. As a matter of fact, as I pointed out in the House before, the grants are increasing, albeit under the current proposal at a slightly lower rate. We will receive hundreds of millions of dollars increasing annually. And also because of our share of federal taxation caused by the federal government reducing their indexing, we will in fact probably be receiving almost as much by increased tax points, so that the honourable member has his information wrong. We have been successful in reducing dramatically the PGRT tax, and we have been successful in eliminating entirely all other parts of the National Energy Program. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in those areas that he raised and in many others, I feel a very high level of confidence in our Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. The fact that one minister has responsibility both for Attorney General and for Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs reflects to some degree my desires to have a downsized cabinet, but also reflects to a great degree the high level of confidence that I and the members of our government and caucus place in the Honourable Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, to the Deputy House Leader, to the Attorney General, to the MLA from Medicine Hat, and also to the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, could he please tell us what portion of his time he will allocate to the development of a sophisticated federal-provincial relations strategy consistent with today's demands in that area?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that would take me far too long to answer in the question period. Suffice it to say that the estimates of my department will eventually reach the floor of the Assembly, and those would be an appropriate time to discuss those issues with the honourable member and others. So, however, I have now been the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs since November of 1982, and in that respect have a fair degree of experience relative to the issues which are facing the department, and those consist of, amongst other things, the constitutional negotiations which will be facing us. As honourable members are aware, constitutional issues were not settled. We have the issue of Quebec in the Constitution. We have Aboriginal rights. We have the subject of possible amendments to the Constitution relating to the role of that august body occupied by so many friends of the Liberal caucus here called the Senate, and its major reform facing us. And on that one, the Honourable Leader in the Opposition and I agree as to what should be done with those people. Those are just a few items that face the department, and I could go on and on, but Mr. Speaker has risen, so I shall sit.
Further supplementary.
I wish you'd placed in your list a priority on energy and agriculture, neither of which were listed by the Minister. Could the Premier please tell us whether the Minister really has the time to coordinate complex areas of negotiation with the federal government, for example, energy negotiations, because it's very clear that they're not working?
On the contrary, Mr. Mr. Speaker, I believe that they are working, and my judgment is that the Minister does have the time. It'll always be something that's reviewed, but what I've observed up to now is that he is not only providing the time, but is doing an excellent job in both responsibilities.
Final supplementary to the Premier. Final supplementary to the Premier. Since federal-provincial relations over the past decade were given such an important priority by having that department report to a single senior minister, is the Premier telling us that today's concerns in the federal-provincial relations arena, energy, agriculture, free trade, established program funding, and I could go on and on, are less critical and are not deserving of a full-time minister's attention?
No, I'm not saying that, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Centre, followed by the member for Bow Valley.
Mr. Speaker, many churches throughout the United States and Canada, particularly here in Alberta, have taken the lead in providing sanctuary for numbers of refugees who have come to our lands from other oppressive countries. Since these refugees are often in need of medical attention, why does the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care continue to turn his back on these refugees by refusing them access to health care in this province?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure that I understand at all the import of the honourable member's question. So far as I'm aware, we are providing within this province probably substantially better medical care than might exist in the countries that those people came from. But I'd be pleased if the honourable member has instances where people have came here from other countries and are suffering a great deal through the lack of a health care program, to take it under consideration, see what can be done.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, letters I have from the St. Barnabas Society and others in Edmonton suggest that refugee claimants who are claiming for full-time status in Canada are not eligible for premiums, not eligible for health care in this province, are not eligible to the Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan. They have written the Minister and others on this matter and have been told that such refugees are not eligible for premiums, for assistance.
Member.
Yeah, the question is, with that kind of information, why does the Minister continue to refuse to grant them eligibility?
Well, I haven't noticed that the ministers refused to do anything. I'd be pleased if the honourable member has a concern with respect to health care of one of his constituents or others, if he would bring it directly to my attention with some details, and I'll look into it. I frankly don't understand, Mr. Speaker, the approach during the question period. I'm pleased to look into it if the member will give me some information, but surely I can't look into an individual problem with a broadly based question like the member provided.
That's right.
Member for supplementary.
Yes, supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister of Manpower following up in any way the departmental recommendations in his department to negotiate an arrangement between the Canada Employment and Immigration Commission so that special documentation confirming residency is provided to refugees, as is done in many other provinces in Canada?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the honourable member, we are on an ongoing basis in touch with the federal departments of immigration. I have just traded correspondence with the new minister. We have talked about a number of issues that involve immigration, and certainly the point that the honourable member makes will be subject to further discussion.
A final supplementary to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care. Is he saying on record, therefore, that refugees in Alberta are eligible for health care on the health care insurance plan in the province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan does pay benefits to people who have landed immigrant status in Alberta. It's not possible, nor would I want to suggest that the Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan, which people of this province pay for, is going to cover every single person who might arrive on a doctor's doorstep in Alberta. Obviously, there are illegal immigrants in every country, all kinds of people who may want medical care who are not recognized as either citizens or landed immigrants or residents of a particular jurisdiction. What we do in Alberta in this regard is no different than they would do in any other province in Canada, I don't believe, and probably no different than any place else in the world where they would have a medical insurance program. Again, if the honourable member has a specific instance or case of individual people who are lacking in medical attention in this province, I'd be pleased to look into the details as to why and whether or not there's any way that we can expand our system to help them.
Member for Bow Valley, supplementary.
Supplementary to the
Earlier, so brief supplementary, please, Edmonton Centre. Thank you.
Supplementary, since Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba all provide full health care protection to refugees, is there something unique about this province which precludes change to our residency requirements for refugees who are not still, as I'm aware, able to have eligibility under the plan?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing particularly unique about Alberta. As I said earlier, I'd be pleased to look into any cases of where people are not receiving medical attention that do need it. But the question of whether or not people who are illegally in your province or your country should be provided with medical care is not one that I'm prepared to give an answer to by simply saying yes, they can be, because in my view that would significantly alter the concept of medical insurance coverage as we now know it in this province.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo, supplementary.
Supplementary to the Minister of Hospitals, Mr. Speaker, and I was wondering whether or not the Minister is prepared to take steps to make it easier for immigrants to Canada who have medical training to obtain internships and in order to be able to practice in Alberta, so that they can treat other immigrants who may have language problems in their own languages.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a very important question, and I just yesterday had a meeting with the Register of the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Alberta, Dr. Roy Lariche, and he and I did discuss that very matter, and his concern, which has been expressed publicly, that there are not enough internship places in Alberta and Canada for doctors who come here from other countries. On the other hand, there are a number of opinions which suggest that simply because you arrived here by way of traveling with a spouse and have a medical degree from some other country shouldn't entitle you to a place ahead of, for instance, some native-born Albertan who's looking for the same spot in an internship program. So the issue has two sides to it, Mr. Speaker, both of which can be argued quite successfully by individuals depending on what their concerns are. But I just conclude by saying, yes, it is a concern. I personally would like to see us have an opportunity to provide opportunities for more of these people to get their license to practice medicine in Alberta, because we often find that they are the ones who will serve smaller communities where medical doctors are oftentimes in short supply.
Member for Bow Valley, followed by the member for Edmonton Kingsway, if there's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, and again, it's regarding the imports from, or the European Economic Community. There's been some hearings going on over regarding the countervail on European beef into Canada. Are these hearings completed, and if so, what is the result?
Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge and in response to the honourable member, it is our understanding that the Canadian Import Tribunal is going to report by July the 25th as to whether there is any material damage to our Canadian cattle production here by the European subsidized beef, and we look forward to the results of that hearing by the Canadian Import Tribunal, and I underscore, hopefully they are to report by July the 25th.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Are we still importing European beef into Canada?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware also, though, that when the Canadian Import Tribunal reported in mid-June, they indicated that the Canadian cattlemen did have an alleged concern as it related to subsidized European beef, and because of that, the Department of National Revenue imposed a tax on the beef that was coming into Canada to somewhat offset this detrimental situation as it relates to our Canadian cattlemen.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Treasurer. The Minister refused again yesterday to answer my questions about the extent of the Treasury branch involvement with the Northwest Trust and its associated companies. Was the Treasurer saying that he doesn't know the extent of that involvement?
Mr. Speaker, I have already answered, I guess, now on 3 different occasions this question, indicating quite clearly that when it comes to commercial confidentiality, I must maintain the confidence which the Treasury branch has with this client and with all clients, and to do anything else would be an affront, not just to the citizens of Alberta who deal with the Treasury branch, but to the Treasury branch itself. And while I am on this point, Mr. Speaker, it is regretful that the sudden position taken by this member with respect to the viability of the Treasury branch is now causing some concerns to the system. I would hope that he'd think carefully about his choice of words with respect to the future of the Treasury branch in this province.
Hear, hear. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The question was, is the Minister on top of it, and does he know how much the loans and debentures are to Northwest Trust?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that question, of course, has again been answered, and for me to give any different answer to vary my position would of course be difficult both for the Treasury branch and for other clients of the Treasury branch.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The Treasurer said the other day that the Treasury branch alone makes the decisions upon the merits of investment. Does the Treasurer mean by that he does not believe it is his responsibility, at the very least, to know the extent of the Treasury branch risk or the nature of its loan portfolio, and is he willing to reveal this to the Assembly?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with respect to my...
Minister, I believe that the order of questioning is truly out of order. The matter was raised yesterday. The Minister's answers have been consistent with regard to the operation between the relationship between his office and the said institutions. Therefore, the Chair recognizes the member for Calgary-Miller.
Order. Mr. Speaker.
We're almost at the end of question period.
Well, just on a point of order, he can refuse to answer. I'm well aware of that. But that doesn't mean that we can't keep asking the questions till we get the answers, because there's public involvement here, and it could affect back in terms of the budget here in this Assembly.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As long as the Honourable Member for Edmonton Kingsway is prepared to accept the fact, it's well within the purview of the Minister to keep answering in a similar way and saying no.
Of course, one final supplementary then, Mr. Speaker. I have here the statement of the Treasury branch, and they indicate in here that on behalf of management and staff, I would like to extend expression of gratitude to our Minister, the Honourable Lou Heineman, it's now a new Minister, the Provincial Treasurer and his advisor of Treasury branches, Mr. A.F.
Question, please. This is supplemental.
It shows that the Treasurer is responsible to the Treasury branches and should know what is going on. So why does the Treasurer have a policy of not providing vital information about public dollars to this legislature?
I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that the member raises the question of responsibility. First of all, there's no doubt the members on this side recognize fully their responsibility to manage the resources of this province and to accept the responsibility given to us by the legislation in which we operate. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that this member recognizes his responsibility to citizens of Alberta with respect to negative comments with respect to the Treasury branch, which I think is irresponsible.
Time for question period has expired. The Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services wishes to give supplementary information as an answer to earlier in the question period today. Is that agreed? Opposed?
Nick, I asked the question earlier. You want the information or not?
Okay. Orders. Honorable members. Orders of the day.